Hello there, I am making a multiplayer spaceship racing game, and this is Develop Zero. So I wanted to make a movement based game because those are fun, and so I had the idea of a racing game, but really making use of the three dimensions. Like there are parts of the track where you just go straight up and down in a spiral or in a crazy 3D zigzag. So naturally, instead of racing with cars, we race with planes, or spaceships in this case, because I want to make it more arcade and less realistic. It's basically Skydrift but in space, and less combat and more movement and sabotaging and stuff maybe. My engine of choice is Godot. 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 I don't know how to say it.
Godot.
Godot it is, I guess. And I've never used Godot before. My first project in Godot is a 3D multiplayer game. And I don't know anything about making a multiplayer game in any engine. I'm cooked. I did once make a prototype in Unity with a plane model I grabbed off of Sketchfab. But then the whole Unity runtime fee thing happened. And they did go back on it and made better changes for the free version. But I thought it's still better to learn a different engine. So between Unreal and Godot, I picked Godot, mainly because of the heavy system requirements of Unreal that my laptop maybe can't support just yet. And on the contrary, Godot is fast and lightweight. So to get started with the project, I got a spaceship model from Sketchfab, imported it in Godot, and made a basic controller script. The mouse-based control scheme is inspired by the plane controls of War Thunder and spaceship control of No Man's Sky. And I'm sure there are a lot of other games which use similar controls, but those are the ones I've personally played. I also made a long ground and a bunch of buildings on the side as a reference point for how the flying feels. You can't really tell if you're flying in front of an empty void. I then made a first person camera mode and the ability to switch between first person and third person by pressing F1 key. So you can get a more immersive experience with the cockpit view, though it doesn't really look like a cockpit here. I changed the spaceship from a rigid body node to a character body node. You see, a rigid body is controlled by the physics system and you can apply forces, which is what I was doing up until now, but it just didn't quite feel right. But a character body is controlled manually by scripts, so you can get it moving exactly how you want and make it feel just right. Another thing I did with the camera is that in third person mode it doesn't rotate on the Z axis anymore, so you still know which way is up and don't get disoriented. But it still does in first person, because immersion. And also that the camera kind of falls behind the player rather than sticking to the player. It's a common technique to make the camera feel good and also gives you a sense of speed. And you can see the spaceship turning better. Godot's default sky is very flat and boring, and the same problem of not being able to tell where you're moving still remains when there aren't any structures around. So I changed it to a space skybox. So when you're turning, you can see that, because it's not completely flat. I also changed the materials and colors of the spaceship model a bit to make it look better. The original model has a weird color scheme, though this one is temporary anyways for prototyping until I make proper art for the game. Also, I got a model of actual buildings rather than just putting long cubes in a line. And I made a big open area where you can fly around. I made this cool thrust effect, which is really just a cube with a gradient texture. I made the cube model in Blender, which has only the 4 sides we need, and UV mapped it to apply the texture correctly. And then in Godot, I gave it a gradient texture and set the transparency blend mode to add and gave it a color. And now it actually scales based on the speed, so the faster you go, the longer it is. This is my best work yet in video game visual effects. Oh, and I also added trails on the side, which is actually not a built-in feature like Unity, but you have to use an add-on, which I get is one of Godot's philosophies. Any non-essential feature should be an add-on. Even terrain is an add-on and not built-in, unlike Unity. I made some UI for the mouse controls and for the spaceship speed. The spaceship turns based on how far the mouse is from the center of the screen. So I made this line thing which shows it visually, and if it's inside the center circle it doesn't turn at all, not even slightly. And there's a bug with the camera where if you switch from first person to third person it would keep the Z-axis rotation, which is really wacky trying to control it like this. So I fixed it by simply resetting the Z rotation to 0 when you switch to third person. The basic prototype for how the controls and movement should feel are done. And I've heard from game dev YouTubers that if you want to make a multiplayer game, the multiplayer part is the first thing you should do. Because it's much easier to make a feature and add multiplayer support for it while you're making it rather than make the whole game and then try to add multiplayer support to it later. And as I've said before, I don't know anything about making multiplayer game. I only have theory knowledge of networking from college. So I followed a tutorial just to get it working using Godot's high-level multiplayer API. And it really was working. But here's the problem. I had no idea how or why it was working. So you would think the natural thing to do here is watch more tutorials, read documentation and online articles about the high-level multiplayer system to better understand how it works and how to use it. Well, you're wrong. Real programmers implement their own system using low-level networking protocols. That was a joke. But I decided to do that anyway, using TCP, which I've since learned that it's not the best for real-time multiplayer, but I need to get it working first at least. I can always refactor to use UDP instead whenever I feel it's absolutely necessary. So obviously, the first thing to do now was to make the menu UI. With the host button and join button, the host button doesn't do anything, and the join button changes the screen where you can enter server address to join to. But it still doesn't actually do anything. I also added a player name field. Then I actually started making the multiplayer manager, which is a singleton script added to autoload. It uses the TCP server and stream peer TCP classes given in Godot. And I was trying to transfer the player name when the client connects to the server. But it seems to be broken. It freezes the game when I join. The problem was that I was trying to transfer data from the client before it even connected to the server. So I have to check the status to see when it connected, and then only transfer the data. So to test it, I put a 32-bit unsigned integer and get it on the server when the client connects. And we successfully transferred 69 across 2 instances on the local network. Then I separated the multiplayer manager into multiplayer client and multiplayer server scripts, which are also both autoload singletons. And I got the player name transferring also working. I made this multiplayer player info class to contain all the necessary fields that need to be sent when player connects, and use the var to bytes function, which takes a variant type, which is basically the dynamic type of GDScript, which can take any value of any data type, and converts it to a packed byte array, which is what you put in the TCP stream. That ended up with a really interesting error, which says that multiplayer player info type It's the globally declared type of the same name, which doesn't make any sense because there is only one definition of that class, and it's not pre-existing in Godot, nor is it an autoload script. My theory is, now I don't know if it's true, but my theory is that bytes to var function, which converts byte array to variant, actually redefined the type in order to make the variant, which ends up hiding the globally defined class that I created. And that's because it doesn't throw the error when I comment out that specific line which calls the function. Like, that's stupid. So the only solution I could think of was to do my own serialization. And so I created methods to serialize and deserialize the object to and from a byte array, and just used that. Now it was getting a bit inconvenient that I was adding the size separately and then the serialized data. And I will also need other types of data to be sent, not just player data when they join. So I made a utility class called multiplayer message, which contains an enum for the type of message and static functions for serialization and deserialization for specific type of message. I didn't go for the object-oriented approach here where each message would be its own object with the info such as type, size and data, but just using utility functions. Because in the server and client, I need to check for the message type anyway to do the specific functionality of that message. So I can just call the specific function I need there. And I get the message type and size from the stream also on the client and server scripts. And didn't want to pass around the connection object. So it's more of a functional approach for this specific case. Also, I started using dictionaries to represent data rather than defining a class for each type of message. So multiplayer player info is now obsolete also. I implemented a player join message, player join act message, which the server sends back to the client when it joins with the ID it assigned to the client, and a player leave message. So now you can see a working lobby where you can see the players join and leave. I added a game start message and a start button for the host. Eventually it will be a ready system, but for now it's fine. So when a game starts, the client switches scenes and loads the level, and also spawns all the player scenes in different positions based on their ID. And now comes the interesting part. Synchronizing the players across clients. I made a player sync message and a multiplayer sync sender and receiver scripts. The sender is a child node to the main player node, which the client controls and sends the player sync message with position and rotation every frame, and the receiver on the player nodes which represent the other players, which gets the sync state and sets the position and rotation from it. The server just gets all the sync messages and accumulates them and broadcasts it at the end of each frame. But something was wrong. Whenever I started a game, it froze the game. For all clients. I had no idea where the issue was. I even questioned if it was a problem with the TCP protocol because of how it works. So I just went away from development for 2 days until I randomly remembered a specific piece of code and figured out what the problem was. You see, the server doesn't need to do anything with the sync data, just needs to get it from the clients and broadcast it to the other clients. So I didn't bother deserializing it and reserializing it. Therein lies the problem, because I read the message type and size first from the stream to determine the type of message and to get the message data with the size. So when I check that the type is player sync, I accumulate the sync message bytes into a single byte array, but I only add the data, not the type and size. So the client can't pass the message at all, and everything went up in flames. Probably because it was trying to read an absurdly large amount of data from the stream which wasn't there and blocked the process until it got that data. It was a simple fix, just added the type and size first before that data, and bam, the synchronization actually works. While we're essentially at the same place we were before, getting it to work this way feels so much more satisfying, and I actually understand what's going on under the hood. And I have control over the exact amount of data that needs to be sent across the network. But it also means I would have to implement myself a lot of the features which come out of the box in Godot's high-level system, and it's a good learning experience. So this is where we're stopping for now, and I want you to suggest a name for this game and give some more feedback and suggest what direction it could go in. You can do that in the comments or join my Discord server and talk to me directly. Link in description. In the next devlog, you will probably see some progress on actual gameplay. But for now, this is about it. And I will see you next time.